I'm Joel McCower here in Studio C with Mark Puck Mykleby. We're talking about a national strategy for America to be more resilient, more secure, and more sustainable. And this came out of the work you did in the Marines and then ultimately working for Admiral Mullen in the Pentagon. Give us a little flavor of that first.
Sure. About 2009, Navy Captain Wayne Porter, who had been on Admiral Mullen's staff for years, and I was pulled up from Special Operations Command. We were asked by Admiral Mullen to take a look at what a grand strategy for the United States would look like. And that's not a national security strategy, not a national defense strategy, but what's the big trajectory that America needs to get on to make it in the 21st century.
Right, and there were four big buckets that you saw we could deploy in America that would sort of help us get there.
Yeah, well, the baseline concept for this strategy that Wayne Porter and I developed was that sustainability needs to become our national strategic imperative. We wrote a national strategic narrative. It was a concept piece. It didn't get into the specifics. It laid out some certain priorities. But the work that I'm doing now that I'm retired with New America Foundation, gets at, okay, what's the so what? How do you create the strategic framework to actually implement a national grand strategy of sustainability? And in any grand strategy, when America has done grand strategy well, it's always allowed its economy to do the strategic heavy lifting. So that's where we started. And we looked at, and that's actually three big bins of demand. The three big bins of demand that allow sustainability to become this new engine are, first of all, around housing, specifically walkable communities, smart growth housing, if we can use those words. The second bin of demand is around regenerative agriculture. And the third bin of demand is for a productivity revolution. We're talking about advanced manufacturing, renewable energy, and the new types of industries that allow us to radically reduce our resource intensity per unit of GDP. And the numbers around those three big macro bins of demand truly are historic. Same level of demand that powered our engine post-World War II. We have these factors playing available to us right now to really drive a new strategy going forward.
So you're saying that the economics of doing this are already in place, they're already potential.
The opportunity is staring us right in the face,
yeah.
And
the economics make sense.
The economics make complete sense, and in fact, if you listen to most economists, including Ben Bernanke, they're saying we have to find big, huge pools of demand if we're going to get out of what some economists are calling this contained depression we're in. Because right now, any kind of fiscal or monetary policy, there's no amount of quantitative easing that's going to get us out of it. We're at a 75-year historic global economic recalibration point, similar to the crash of '29. We have to think in those historic terms and recognize that specifically around the demographics trends in the United States in particular, these are historic. Right now we have 56% of our Americans don't like where they live. That's the combination of baby boomers and millennials coming together, and more specifically, those 56%, mostly made up of millennials and baby boomers, want the attributes of smart growth. That, in comparison to what the returning GIs, what they provided to our economy in the forms of housing purchases post-World War II, that drove our economy through the late 70s to early 80s, housing being that economic driver, this 56% is actually provides three times more demand than what the returning GI is supposed to.
So the opportunity here is that we have an ability to, an unfilled need for urban housing and smart communities that people, you believe, are ready, willing, and able to come in, and that's bigger than the housing boom after World War II.
Absolutely, and it's pure market forces. The other part around regenerative agriculture is incredible. The Rodale Institute just got done last year doing a 30-year study comparing what if we can call it industrial ag, our current model that we currently practice, and made a comparison between regenerative agriculture and the economic numbers. Just to cut to the chase, per acre, regenerative agriculture is 3 times more profitable than our current model, simply because you take in externalities, the full value chain, the amount of subsidies that have to go into one or the other, plus the petroleum use, and the ancillary health costs of the food we currently eat. 3 times more profitable. And really, on a global scale, the interesting thing is that, according to the OECD, We, on a global scale, have to increase our food production by 60% by 2050 to accommodate the growing population, global population, and 100% of that has to be regenerative due to ecosystem limitations. So right now, we have the opportunity to take per acre 3 times more profitable doing regenerative agriculture techniques and still be the breadbasket for the world. And we can do it, which is kind of Machiavellian, but we can do it at a time when world food prices are an all-time high. It makes a complete economic sense to make that transition right now.
And still feed the world the way
and
at the price and
right. And also get ourselves healthy. You know, I often quote that 1/3 of our nation is clinically obese. 2/3 are overweight. And we spend, I think, on average, $190 billion a year just in type 2 diabetes treatment, which is a largely preventable disease. I mean, that's just wasted money.
Right. And what was the third?
The third one is a productivity revolution in terms of transitioning to things, to advanced forms of manufacturing, talking 3D printing, stereolithography, but also all the things we need for renewable energy. That's a huge, big space. So, I mean, right now, the United States, it takes us 1.5 times more stuff per unit of GDP, or to crank out a unit of GDP, than the average industrial Western European nation. That's just pure waste. And part of making that work is doing a classic Pigovian tax shift. Right now, we actually tax productivity, and you can waste for free. What we're talking about is flipping the logic of that large-scale policy so that we start taxing waste, and you can start producing at it costs you less to produce.
So this all sounds good, but it sounds like we need wholesale changes in policy, in business models, in farming techniques, in pretty much everything we do. This is a massive shift. Is this even possible?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. We've done it before in the past. Detroit didn't want to shift over from making cars to making tanks and airplanes and everything, but we did it. We turned on a dime. We did the same thing in 1947 with the National Security Act. We created institutions, not just within our government, but we also created things like the World Bank and the IMF. All those things were created at the frameworks were created in 1944. We've done this in our past, and all of a sudden, for some reason now, we're looking, I mean, we go back to our past and we talk about the greatest generation, you know, and say it's great. Well, I hope that in World War II and the post-World War II world, I hope that wasn't our greatest generation, because we have to be the greatest generation. So can it be done? Sure, it can be done. Anything can be done. It's just, do you have the will, do you have the guts, and do you have the grit to do it? And do we, you know, when I get to that last point of grit, do we have the grit to actually ask Americans to act like citizens instead of treating them like they're a bunch of residents that just pay their rent and they can keep doing what they're doing? What are the details? Well, yeah, it's going to be a long, gut-wrenching siege, but the framework that we've developed at New America Foundation is we've got a strategic design, a top-down policy design, as well as the bottom-up regional cluster thing to animate these ideas of sustainability, just to show that it works, the economics are sound. And so we're trying to go through a series of large-scale efforts so that by 2020, sustainability is our national strategic imperative, and America is poised to start moving in that direction. So that's our timeline, 7 years. There's a historical analogy to it. That's kind of the way the flow of containment went. It took about 7 years to create the structures and actually implement the structures for grand strategy containment. And so we have a historic touch point.
Well, I love the idea of the Marines landing on the shores of America, metaphorically speaking, to create this great transformation. Thanks so much, Mark.
Sure, thank you.